All right, let's get back into it, thinking about Hooker's objective list theory. And this is the article that you read this week by Brad Hooker, titled The Elements of Well-Being. And the title itself, this is in the ethical life, indicates his approach. He doesn't think there is one fundamental measure of well-being. There are many. There is a plurality or of elements, right? There are many components that make your life better. There are many measures of a good life, not just one. Okay. Now, I mean, so okay, let's put me away down on the screen. Come back to this slide. So again, situating this debate between Hooker and Heathwood as a debate between subjectivists and objectivists concerning the nature of well-being or welfare. And again, Hooker's claim is that there are objective measures of human welfare. There are things that are intrinsically good for us and that make our lives better all by themselves, whether we desire them or not. Again, this is the fundamental distinction, right? So let's take Charlie in the example from Heathwood. He gets more freedom. If that freedom is genuinely valuable, and there's an open question about whether the freedom to drive your car faster is genuinely valuable, right? But the thought here is that certain kinds of freedom are intrinsically good for us. They make our lives better. It's better to be free, however we're defining freedom, because it all by itself makes your life better, even if you do not particularly want it. And you can imagine someone who has been living under conditions of oppression, has been abused, let's say, and they are about to be liberated from the conditions of their abuse, right? But they are not aware of themselves as benefiting from the liberation. From their point of view, right, the conditions of their oppression was what they wanted. And so when they are liberated, they are not fully aware of how it makes their life better. But Hooker would say that that does not change the fact that their life is made better. The quality of their life improves the more free they become, even if they themselves are not particularly interested in becoming more free. Okay, so welfare is not a purely subjective quality, according to Hooker. Here is his proposed list of intrinsic goods, of things that are good for us that make our lives better, whether we desire them or not. Pleasure, most people want pleasure, but from Hooker's point of view, you can imagine someone who is in a bad state and no longer interested in certain types of pleasure. Now, it may be hard to imagine that kind of case. But his point is that experiencing more pleasure improves the quality of life, whether you feel it that way or not, or whether you are aware of it or not. Significant achievement, accomplishing things, right? Accomplishing something significant, accomplishing goals that matter. Important knowledge, right? Educating yourself, learning more, becoming more informed, right? But not about trivial things. Autonomy, that's another word for freedom. Appreciating beauty, right? Being in a position to enjoy art, beauty in nature. Being virtuous, living a morally good life, right? This adds a component of morality to the conception of a person's well-being, right? Morality is intrinsically good, Hooker would say, or virtue, like courage, is intrinsically good. It makes your life better, whether, right, independently of your attitudes toward it. Friendship as well, right? Having friends makes your life better all by itself. Again, most people want friends, right? But the point is, like, even in a moment where you're sort of feeling isolated and want to be alone, like, friendship improves your life. So the argument then is that he makes is, like, all of these things are thought to make your life better, but are they independent of each other? So for example, are they really separate or elements of well-being, or is there one that is fundamental and that everything else reduces to that? So the hedonist wants to say that pleasure is the fundamental good. So the hedonist would say that there is only one intrinsic good, pleasure or enjoyment. And so, okay, the hedonist doesn't deny that significant achievement, accomplishing goals matters, but it matters insofar as it makes your life more pleasant. Right? That's why it contributes to your welfare. That's why it improves the quality of your life, because significant achievement is one way of enjoying your life more. Similarly, but the hedonist would say if accomplishing some goal of yours, even if it seems significant from the outside, if it doesn't contribute to the enjoyment of life or to the other people's enjoyment of life, then it doesn't contribute to your welfare. It doesn't make your life better. So the hedonist would say that everything, right, is either an instrument to more enjoyment of life, either your own enjoyment or the enjoyment of others, or it's part of what it means to enjoy your life. Okay, but Hooker's denying that. Hooker's claiming that sometimes you achieve important goals or significant goals, and it doesn't make you enjoy your life any better anymore, but it makes your life better. Right? It raises the quality of your life, right? Even if it doesn't make it more enjoyable. He would say something similar about freedom, right? So sometimes becoming more free doesn't make your life more enjoyable, but it makes your life better, right? But Hooker, his strategy for his argument is to kind of to sort of imagine two different lives, right? In one life, we have all of these other goods, okay, but it lacks significant achievement. So imagine a life where there's pleasure, the person is well informed, they enjoys some measure of freedom or autonomy, they have place in their life for beauty and art, they are relatively virtuous, right? They're courageous, they live a morally good life, and they have friends, right? They have all these things, but they haven't achieved anything significant. Haven't sort of made a difference to the world. So the question he asks as he makes his argument, Hooker, is, well, would adding significant achievement, right, so to that person's life, make it better? Even if it wouldn't increase the amount of pleasure or it make them more informed or more free, even if it wouldn't make them appreciate beauty more, or it wouldn't make them more virtuous, or it wouldn't add more friends to their life, would significant achievement, would accomplishing some significant goal make their life better? And if the answer is yes, then that suggests that a life with all of these things, pleasure, knowledge, autonomy, beauty, virtue, and friendship, but lacking significant achievement, is a less good life, right, than a life that has all of these things and significant achievement. From which he would conclude that significant achievement is an independent element of the good life. It's an intrinsic good whose goodness is independent of the other goods. And so having it all by itself makes your life better. It's one of a plurality of components of human welfare. That's the argument that he makes. So he conducts this thought experiment, right? Consider two lives, one with and one without the relevant good. Would one life be better? Would having that good all by itself benefit the person living that life? If the answer is yes, right, this is the structure of the argument, then we ask, well, what's the best explanation? What's the best explanation for why that person's life becomes better by achieving a significant goal of theirs? Well, if the best explanation is that the good is intrinsic, right, if significant achievement is an intrinsic or fundamental element of well-being, then that's the conclusion that we should draw. We have to look at it on a case-by-case basis. So it might be that in one instance, right, the best explanation for why I benefit from achieving something significant is that it makes my life more enjoyable, right? If that was the best explanation, then I wouldn't conclude that significant achievement is a fundamental or intrinsic element of well-being. It's an instrument to pleasure. But if the best explanation for why achieving some significant goal of mine benefits me is that it has value in itself, right? Independently of all these other things that I care about, then we should draw the conclusion that significant achievement is an intrinsic element of well-being. It's a fundamental measure of what it means for your life to go well. Okay, that's Hooker's test of objectivity, and that shows you the structure of the argument that he makes. Right? All right, in the next video, we'll look at Wolf. But let me sort of introduce Wolf before. She raises this question, Susan Wolf, about self-interest. So Heathwood's word is welfare. He's interested in, in what does a person's welfare consist? Hooker calls it well-being, right? How do we analyze the concept of well-being? What does it consist in? What are its elements? Wolf uses the word self-interest, right? In what does a person's self-interest consist? That's her central question. And this is a quote from page 54. To act in one's own self-interest, this is in the Ethical Life, Susan Wolf. So to act in one's self-interest, in one's own self-interest, is to act on the motive of advancing one's own good. Okay, so this is her way of framing the question of welfare, right, in terms of self-interest. And then this is how she defines acting in one's own self-interest. This is a good example of what to do in your writing. Define your term. So self-interest is a vague term. It could mean many things. It's your job as a writer to define how you're using that term. So she does that. To act in one's own self-interest is to act on the motive of advancing one's own good, as opposed to on the motive of advancing someone else's good, or on the motive of destroying one's own good or destroying someone else's good. Or, there are many things that motivate us to act, right? What is involved in acting from self-interestedly, right? It has to do with the motive. I'm acting self-interestedly. I'm acting in my self-interest if I'm acting on the motive of advancing my own good. Okay, so that raises the question, what is one's own good? What does it mean to act on that motive? Right? What am I trying to advance when I'm advancing my own good? There are three different options, okay? The first is hedonism. We've talked about that, right? What it means to advance one's own good is to advance the felt experience of pleasure or happiness. So to act in one's own self-interest from a hedonistic perspective is to act on the motive of advancing the experience of pleasure, right? Producing more experiences of pleasure or more happiness for myself and for others. And we have, secondly, a preference theory of self-interest. And this is what we saw in Heathwood. He's one example of a preference theory. To act on the motive of advancing one's own good is to act on the motive of satisfying some desire of mine or my net desires, right? To satisfy as many desires as I can. Given that I have limited options, I'm going to choose to do the thing that will satisfy my net desires, right? The overall net of my desires, right? I can't ever satisfy all of my desires, right? But the idea is that I'm acting to advance, I'm acting in my self-interest if I'm acting on the motive of satisfying as many desires as I can. And then finally, we have the objective list theory, which we saw in Hooker, right? One's own good does not depend on one or two, right? That there are measures of my good that are independent of the felt experience of pleasure and that are independent of the satisfaction of desire. Okay, so that's Wolf. In the next video, we'll continue thinking about Wolf. She's going to shift gears and talk about meaning. Okay, I have this funny picture of a woman worried about whether her life has any meaning. But this is the question that she raises really at the center of the essay. And it's a different kind of question, right? Is meaning part of the fun, one's own good? Is it part of what contributes to the goodness of one's life? And so she turns to the case of Sisyphus, this ancient Greek myth, in order to raise that question. And that's where we'll end up. That's where we'll come in the next video. Okay.